Tom, I don't know where to start with you. So much to ask you. When did you go out to Ukraine? And did you realise when you went out the scale of what you would be doing?
So we went out about 2 days after the start of the war. The scale as in of what we are now, never in a million years, wasn't particularly something that I wanted. I prefer to just operate sort of like on my own and do what I do best, which is obviously going in the conflict areas and getting the animals and stuff like that. But then obviously we needed to facilitate what happens once we got them out of the conflict area in Ukraine. So obviously from there it just grew and grew and grew, and it continues to grow and grow and grow, and it probably will continue to grow and grow and grow.
So you've rescued animals in other conflict zones.
But yeah, so I've been to conflict zones around the world with the military all over, so I've seen the suffering of animals in obviously some of the worst conflict zones in the last 20 years. But so we knew straight away, especially with the war in Ukraine, because it was more of a more conventional warfare, which basically means less sort of like insurgency and more like army on army. So it's going to be more brutal. So we knew that from the off, which is why we knew there'd be a lot of animals that were going to be in need and going to be caught in the crossfire, more so than in any other conflict in the last sort of like 40, 50 years.
And how big a plan can you have? I mean, how much planning goes into it?
I sat there for the first couple of days. I had to look at obviously what the Russians were doing, where they was launching their assaults or attacks were inside of Ukraine, and decided on sort of like the border that I wanted to operate from, and that decision was made tactically, as well as the location that I wanted to obviously sort of like establish the key hub for our supply chain, so to speak, which is only meant to be small, just a place to get a few supplies in, stuff like that. So then obviously we could then move out to the conflict areas and obviously resupply shelters, people with food and supplies, and then obviously get the animals in and come out. So that was planned. Our individual ops are obviously constantly planned. We look into every aspect. We go through the intelligence, what the Russians are doing, what the area's like, obviously how we can get in, how we can get out. And we plan all them individually, like hugely. As far as planning to what we've actually built, it's kind of like a reaction to the war. So to what the turns the war takes, the rules, regulations, laws that other countries are implementing. So we're just constantly reacting to what's going on, obviously around Ukraine and in Ukraine, as to how we can best, obviously, help the animals as we obviously build. So
was your focus the shelters, or was it people's homes? The need is so great. How did you work all that out? I say people's homes that probably weren't even standing.
To me, it's always been about maximum preservation of life. So wherever we can get to on any given day to save the most lives that are in the most need, that's how we operate. That's how we look at it. So it's maximum preservation of life. So if you've got 4 dogs that are suffering in a conflict area, in an area of huge conflict, or you've got 50 dogs in an area of huge conflict, we'll go for the 50.
And how did you earmark those animals, those shelters?
All you had to do is look on social media, have a look through, look at obviously who's posted what areas, what locations, and obviously research, look into it, reach out to them. Me and Steve would be in the van. Steve would be driving. While he was driving, I was just constantly messages, thousands, having a look.
We see all the footage at home, but you still can't appreciate how horrific it is.
We did one with a shelter where we was getting bombed whilst we was extracting them. We did another one in a village that the Russians were rolling.
Hang on. You did a shelter which was getting bombed while you were extracting them.
Yeah.
How does that work?
Well, luckily, none of them landed on top of us, so it was all right. It was about 600 meters away from the Russian front line, and then IDF indirect fire was coming in. So basically, to the normal general public, sort of like artillery rounds. We had 23 rounds of incoming that were landing, obviously around the shelter, the location that was extracting the animals. So obviously, frag was hitting the side of the shelter. Obviously, dogs were getting all like spooked. So yeah, it was just one of them. You sit there and it's like, grab the dogs, get him in.
And how many dogs were in the shelter? And did you manage to get them all out?
Yeah, we got them all out. I think it was about 115.
This shelter, for example, just give us an idea of the state the dogs were in, or the cats as well, how long they might have been without food, because I know that there's been terrible problems, hasn't there, getting supplies to these animals.
This is towards the start of the war, so they had issues obviously with supplies and stuff like that, but not as bad as most, because we got to them really quick and really early. So the dogs and the cats were all right, because there was obviously cats as well. The dogs and the cats were all right. There was just obviously it was absolutely petrified. I mean, the shelter had been hit with obviously with an artillery round beforehand as well, which actually hit one of the kennels and killed a load of the dogs. Then we obviously got the call and asked if we could go in and get them. So we went in, we got them. There was incredibly spooked, as you can imagine. Most of the dogs that we obviously get from Ukraine, from these areas, they've all got fear aggression inside of them, because they're absolutely petrified. So whenever you try and get near them, a lot of them, I'd say probably over 60%, 65% will try and bite you. So guys who've been bit a few times, obviously we've had to wrestle and pin a few dogs, obviously, to secure them so they can't rip us to pieces, because there's some big dogs out there. And then we just get them out. And then when we get them back to our location, we let them decompress, and then we just turn them around.
And that must be amazing to see.
Yeah, it's incredible. That's obviously it's why we do what we do. And I've had guys come out that came out to volunteer for a week that are in my ground team, like Gaz, for instance, one of my best mates, one of my closest friends. He came out to volunteer for a week just to do me a favor, just to help me out. And then he was just like, nah, I ain't going anywhere. That's it. I'm full time. And he quit his job and he's full time. We've had that a few times. It's because the guys get to see the end result. I genuinely enjoy my time more with animals than I do with humans. I absolutely love them. I love being around them. I love everything about them. So there's very few people in the world that I risk their lives to the level and the extent that obviously that we'll go and do things, but that's our risk to take. That's what we're willing to do, that we deem it a necessity. And it is. They deserve the same level of commitment and dedication to preserving their lives as what humans do. And that's what we're here to do.
And in terms of the need that you've seen, can you give me an insight into that?
Everything that you see with humans, the way that humans are suffering during this war, animals are suffering exactly the same, but in many cases more so and worse. And the reason being is the animal aspect doesn't have the level of aid and support that obviously that humans do. So they're just suffering on every single degree. I mean, we've had some horrific injuries and scenes and stuff that we've come across and things that we've seen. And it's absolutely atrocious. You know, obviously you've got dogs getting shot, you've got dogs getting blown up, phosphorus missiles landing on civilian buildings full of animals that are obviously burning these animals alive. What phosphorus does is it's basically the metal elements, they continue to burn. So it's not just a case of we get hit with metal, that metal continues to burn. So when it obviously hits them, it's burning them. It's continuously burning. And obviously until it runs out of its energy, which can be a very, very long time.
So do you have a vet with you?
Yeah, so we've had veterinarians cycle through. We've had them constantly cycle through, but obviously, as you can imagine, the only thing we can do is we can only work on volunteers. So we can only have what people volunteer to give, i.e. their time wise. So we use veterinarians inside of Ukraine and in local areas and stuff. We're currently working on building our own veterinary clinic, which I know you want to go into later, and have our own permanent veterinarian. For some major ops, we'll try and pull in veterinary teams from obviously around the world if we can. We'll just like reach out to people and say, look, we need a veterinarian for 5 days because we're doing this. It's going to be, the animals are going to need it. Can you help? Blah, 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 blah. Sometimes we don't have them. Obviously, our guys, especially our veterans, are well versed in obviously battlefield trauma on humans. So we just kind of like adhere it as best as what we can to the animals and make them as comfortable and as stable as we possibly can.
Tell me about Sarah.
Sarah's house got hit with a phosphorus missile. Killed 6 of the dogs, 6 or 7 of the dogs inside. I can't remember the exact number now. And there was a further 15 dogs sort of like in the back garden and in the outside area. A load of them got obviously severely injured with the phos and obviously the shrapnel and the explosion. And we went to go get them. And Sarah, you couldn't get anywhere near them. She wanted to rip your face off because she was in that much pain. You can see it in her eyes how much pain she was in. first-degree burns all over her face. Her ears are burnt off in half, all down the back of her and stuff like that. So we loaded up all the other animals that we could get to, like basset hounds, stuff like that, had been injured within the blast. They were perfectly fine to handle. But then Sarah's a German Shepherd. She was angry. I mean, angry. I went over to her, I managed to get hold of her, and we managed to get her into the van. And yeah, she was raging, like, and she was just in absolute agony. And you can see it in her. It was heartbreaking how much pain she was in. So we then managed to get her into a private clinic for 5 days to get her, obviously, a burns treated and all that sort of stuff. And she came back to us, and you could see how much it had soothed. Gave her a couple of days to decompress, and the volunteers that we have do a magical job with every animal. They're absolutely phenomenal. And now Sarah's gone from this dog that wanted to rip me to shreds to every time I see her, and obviously I walk past and I'll just give her a woo, and she's like going absolutely mental. She doesn't like other dogs, but with humans, she's incredible. She's just like a giant fluffy bear that just wants loads of attention. She's absolutely incredible, and that's why we do what we do, because just to give them a chance that they didn't have, and then obviously give them and make sure they get the love they deserve as an animal. And she's living the dream now, and we're going to make sure I was actually speaking to her about it last night, about the rehoming, and she needs to go to a very, very, very special home.
Are you, and don't laugh when I ask this question, but are you ever scared when you go to these places?
Yeah, there's always an element of fear, but it always, I don't know, it always comes down to, like, obviously your mindset and the way you are, and we thrive off that. So some people back off, whereas that pushes us forward and it pushes us on, and that's why obviously I use the people that I use for my teams. But then obviously we also find a lot of humour in what we do, and it's about making peace with the reality of war. And you've got to understand, like, you can't go to a war zone and do what we do and not have an understanding that you might get injured or you might get killed. And when you come to peace with that, there's always that small element of fear, but there's an acceptance as well. Like, if it happens, it happens.
What about those animals that you've got to, but you haven't, that may have been alive, but you weren't able to keep alive, if you like?
There's only been 2.
That's amazing.
In fact, tell a lie. So none of those dogs were. We've not lost a dog that we've extracted from a conflict zone. Not lost a single dog we've extracted from a conflict zone. All cats.
And how many have you extracted?
Direct conflict zones inside of Ukraine, well over 3,000. So another element of what we do is we go and help shelters that aren't in the conflict areas, that are suffering just because of the war, because of obviously, like, the infrastructure at the moment inside of Ukraine, and obviously the lack of supplies and all that sort of stuff. The animals that we've lost have been animals that we've had to remove from these shelters because the shelters are in absolutely disgusting conditions. We didn't go there to extract them, we went there to assist them, like clean out the kennels, vaccinate the animals, deworm, like deparasite the animals and stuff like that. Drop them in supplies and stuff, give them a bit of advice and a bit of mentoring on how they should, like, certain things they should be doing and stuff like that. And then we've gone there and we've taken severely injured animals from there that have been there with severe injuries. We've taken them, and they're the animals that we've lost. We haven't lost a single dog that we've, or cat, or any other creature, animal that we've extracted from a conflict zone. Not one.
That's also what I was coming to, was all the different creatures that you have rescued.
Mm-hmm.
One of your biggest rescues was a pride of 5 lions in Odessa.
5, it was 9. It was 9.
I'm sorry. 5, 9. Okay, but it was lions. How did you hear about it, and how did you do it?
There's a guy out there his name's Lionel DeLang. He loves cats, big cats, loves bears, and he's done a lot to obviously rescue and save lions and bears and stuff from, like, Ukraine. He's from South Africa. He's got his own sanctuary inside of South Africa, and we assisted him on the extraction of 1 lion before, and then with his 9, he reached out to us because obviously logistically it's an absolute challenge. Our job was basically the logistical side of it, so the transporting, so the moving of the animals into the crates, onto the vehicles, and then obviously safely transporting them through Ukraine and then to their obviously final destination, which is a temporary housing sanctuary inside of Romania before they'll then be moved back to South Africa. So he reached out to me, asked me, and as soon as he said it, I was just like, yeah, we can do that.
Well, yeah, we can do that. Did you know at that point how you were going to do that?
All you got to do is you just got to look at it. You just got to assess it. So you know what you're going to need. You know what you're going to require. The only difference is obviously the sense of urgency, and then you've got the danger and the threat of obviously the war. You've got the logistical elements. Can you house all these animals on a move? So I knew straight away I needed to get vehicles that obviously we could house all these animals within to obviously facilitate them. So it was large enough for the crates, strong enough for the crates, and the vehicles are strong enough to move such a long distance, because we had to move them in a one. There's no stopping with obviously lions and stuff like that in your vehicles. It's always achievable. The problem again with the war is obviously the stuff that you need. So normally you'd have like a massive team of vets, you'd have a huge team of like lion experts, you'd have all the medication. We sourced as much kit and equipment as we could. I got hold of an incredible vet who's got a lot of experience in obviously moving cats and stuff like that. Her name's Gemma from Worldwide Vets, absolutely phenomenal. So she came down. We did everything on bare bones. We didn't have the stretchers, we didn't have a crane, we didn't have a forklift. Everything had to be done by hand. I had to build a stretcher out of climbing equipment for these, obviously for the cats to go onto. And yeah, no, it was surreal. It was insane.
And when you say you built the stretchers out of climbing equipment, just tell me about that.
So obviously, I'm a climber. I've got climbing equipment because obviously there's a lot of animals that are stuck in high-rise apartments. So the only way to get into them is going over the balconies. So either climbing up or abseiling down, grabbing the animal, coming back into the room of the balcony that you can get into. So I always have that climbing equipment with me for those incidents that arise. And I've got safety slings, we've got harnesses, obviously I've got rope, we had tarpaulin, so basically we just doubled over the tarpaulin, smashed out the carabiners, used the safety slings, putting some extra lines in there just to reinforce it, and just basically use climbing equipment to build the stretcher, and then basically strengthen it. So that's what we put the lines on, and it was pretty cool, to be fair.
So this is what I can't get my head around is you talk about it like you've just gone, talking about a hike in the Lake District, oh, it was really cool and it was great weather and it was just, I mean, I don't know, you're just so, your attitude, that must be an attitude that you've honed over many years, which allows you to cope with this.
I absolutely love what I do. I love the end result, and that's what matters to me is the end result. And then when we're doing what we're doing, if you sit on it, and any soldier who's been in conflict will tell you, like, the banter between soldiers and the humor between soldiers, like during conflict and firefights and stuff like that, it's always there, and it's got to be, because it brings it, instead of you manifesting and like focusing on the horrors, you add that humor into it, and it sort of like takes you away from it, so to speak, if that makes sense. But yeah, I mean, it was successful. It had some pretty humorous moments within it, and as everything that we do, obviously close calls.
What was some of the humorous moments?
So I remember, because it was light on like sedation, so it was dramatically light on the sedatives, as you can imagine. Like Ukraine, it's to sedate cats, like big cats that size. There's just none of it in Ukraine, so we only had a certain amount. So obviously Gemma had been phenomenal, absolutely brilliant that she did. We was like working with like the bare minimum sedation that we could for these cats, so we could get them all out. And these are the kind of like risks that you've got to take and that are put onto it. But there were no risks because she knew what she was doing. She's very good at what she does. She's absolutely phenomenal. And she said to me, she was like, right, Tom, you need to be really quick with this one. I was like, right, okay, no dramas. I was like, why? I was like, it's sedated, isn't it? And she's like, yeah, it's sedated, but only lightly. I was like, what? She's like, yeah, only lightly, so we need to be quick. And like, obviously we need to be careful and gentle with it. And I was like, so we need to be quick, careful and gentle. We're moving this lion 50 meters, putting it onto a flatbed of a truck, throwing it into a crate. I've then got to get in there with it, roll a 250 kilogram like lion off this stretcher whilst crouched over, because obviously I'm inside the crate with it. And I've got to be quick, but I've got to be quiet and I've got to be light. And I was like, and it's lightly sedated. And she's like, yeah. So then I'm inside this crate with it. And the thing is with lions that I obviously never knew and understood is like their roar comes from obviously like the vocal cords in the system. So whenever you move their head, and because they're breathing, you'll get like a growl. And I'm inside this, obviously, I'm inside this crate, and I'm like ran down. I've got my hands on this lion's face, removing the blindfold, and all I get is a like that. And I was like, "Hey, let's go out, get on it." And it was just it was brilliant. I mean, you can't, as an experience, you just can't. To say you've done something that no one else has ever done is just phenomenal. Like to that degree, it's just it's absolutely crazy. And the priority for us is always the animals. That's always the priority of the safety and getting them out. And it's just brilliant, absolutely brilliant.
So where did lions go to initially, and where are they now?
They're in a sanctuary inside of Romania where they're housed while obviously all the paperwork for the flights and stuff goes through. Outdoor enclosures, grass and stuff like that. They're loving life there. And then they'll be moved to South Africa to a reserve stroke sanctuary in South Africa in about 3 months' time.
Tell me about Bollock the bear. Where was he, and what was his situation?
So Bollock was basically held at he was in a hotel, sort of like as like a gimmick for hotel residents and stuff. And what they'd done is they'd put him into an enclosure, obviously when he was a bit smaller and a bit younger, but it had like a triple tier fencing, and then they built the hotel around him. And when I say this bear was massive, this bear is massive. He's like 600 kilograms. To the point where, like, I was telling everyone how big he was, and people were like, nah, he can't be that big. And then when the Liberty Bear Sanctuary, who we went to, which is like the biggest bear sanctuary in Europe, the director and the main keeper stood there during the day when I opened the back doors as we was moving, because we had to stop every 90 minutes to feed him water. So we're in like a Romanian street, got him out to safety, and I was feeding him, and the keeper stood behind me and he went, effing hell, that is the biggest bear I have seen in my life. And then I'm there feeding him with water. He's taking one by bottle, feeding him water like a baby through the crate, and like giving him food and stuff. It was absolutely mental. But what made Bollock so hard was the fact you couldn't get anything into it because of the infrastructure around it. So you couldn't use forklift. You couldn't sedate him because of no one's like physically looked at this bear for like 15 years. But then also, like, bears have an ability, so I'm told, to be able to reverse sedation. Like, I don't know if it's something to do with a like hibernation thing or whatever, but they can reverse sedation. So because of the 3-layer system of his enclosure, we couldn't put people in there, because if we sedated him and he came round, there would be people stuck in there with him. So we had to trap him. So we had to lure this like 600 kilogram bear into a crate. We had to cut out the enclosure. We had to fix the crate, obviously, to it. And then we had to carry this bear about 50 meters in this huge crate. And we was on site for about 24 hours, like welding, cutting, fixing, to be able to execute it safely and properly, because this hotel still had guests there.
Aside from the war, it sounds like this bear had a horrific existence.
For some animals, like especially some of the animals that we've saved, this war's the best thing that's ever happened to them, because it's allowed us to be able to move them, get them out to new homes that they deserve, and get a life that they should be given. And Bollock was a prime example of this. And Elsa as well. I can't forget Elsa. Elsa was there as well. She was a wolf.
Elsa the wolf, she was also at this hotel as a gimmick.
Yeah, so we extracted them both. We extracted Bollock and we extracted Elsa. Luckily, with Elsa, we did it. I actually pulled it forward. I pulled the extraction forward 2 days, and then it was lucky I did, because the day we got Elsa obviously to the sanctuary, the vet sedated her and gave her like obviously an assessment, and she had some sort of like rupture. She had something that was ruptured inside her, and had he not have noticed it and operated on that day, she'd have been dead the next morning. I didn't want to sedate Elsa because I had a feeling that something was wrong with her. So I wanted to live trap her. We couldn't coax her into the cage, so me and Steve had to go into the cage with her. So we went into her enclosure with her. Just kind of like,
how do you do that? All right. How do you do it though? You go into an enclosure with a wolf. I mean, what?
We had a blanket with us, and then it's just a case of throwing the blanket over the top. You like obviously taking away the teeth, and then just pinning them, controlling the head, and then just wrapping the mouth, and then placing him into a crate. We do that with a lot of large breed aggressive dogs. I'd rather take a bite from her and get her out safely than not. Now she's living the dream, and so's Bollock.
When you've gone to some of these areas, have you come across a lot of Russian soldiers?
We try and avoid them. So I operate on a premise of we'll never go within small arms range of Russian troops. What that means is small arms is basically guns. So they can't point and they can't shoot us. So we'll stay out of range of their small arms weapons. So anything that they can hold by hand, physically point at us and pull a trigger and fire a bullet at us, I'll stay out of that range. And that's just because a group of British, American, Canadian veterans tipping up to Russian soldiers, like, and obviously when they look like us as well, and they're protected, we won't be breathing after it. There won't be any questions asked. We'll get let up like the 4th of July. So it's like, so we just stay out of the small arms range as best we can.
Tell me about then the shelter that you're building. The scale of that isn't something you foresaw, was it?
We need to find a permanent solution for these animals inside of Ukraine, inside a safe area, because our job is to go into areas that people won't and extract the animals that most people can't. But that's what we do. So we needed to establish something that gave us the ability to continue to do that. And we needed a holding area inside of Ukraine, which was a shelter. So we managed to I got a 2-year lease on a building, which is really nice. And we've started building obviously the shelter.
How big a site is it? And just to be clear to listeners, you don't want to reveal the location for security reasons.
No, I don't release direct locations of anything. I never do, because there's always a small risk, and it stops people tipping up randomly as well. Like, there's so many factors, so we don't reveal the location, and nor will we for a very long time. Once it's done, we'll be able to house probably around about 300 dogs, 200 cats, something like that. All depends on obviously the dogs themselves, because if you've got dog aggressive dogs, obviously they've got to be on their own. But if you've got like loads of little dogs that like to be in gangs and play together, then obviously they can go into things. But no, it's going to be awesome. We're having one of the other things that we're putting at the shelter is we're currently working on trying to get a fully functioning veterinary unit, so like a veterinary clinic, and get a full-time vet in there, because we're getting a lot of animals with severe injuries that we need to be able to treat, and we want to be able to treat on site, not just for the animals that we extract, but so that other organizations that are working and helping animals and extracting severely injured animals can give us a ring and say, look, guys, can we take this severely injured animal, because we've got the ability to give them that like obviously top class care and treatment that they need. So we've got that. We're getting quite a few paralyzed dogs coming through that have been shot, various injuries.
And you mentioned the volunteers you've got. How easy or not has it been to find the staff and the volunteers and the money, crucially?
Yeah, the money's a nightmare, as you can imagine. It's so like we kind of put plans in motions and just hope and pray that we can raise what we need to raise to obviously to be able to do what we need to do. I'd rather save a life and struggle than let a life die. So, and that's what I always tell my volunteers, that you're not coming into a shelter that's been designed and made over the space of like a year or 2 years and stuff, and it's been like planned and all this sort of stuff, and got all this coming in and it's state of the art or whatever, or something that's been built over 2 years. I was like, you're talking about something that's been thrown up in a war zone in 3 months.
Is Ukraine now your permanent home?
For me, no. It is for elements of the organization. The shelter in Ukraine is going to be operating for as long as it's needed. We're going to have a team in Ukraine for as long as it's needed. But then we're also going to have a team there's other things going on around the world that can use similar sort of assistance. So we're going to have a team, which obviously led by me, that's going to go out and go to other countries and assist in these similar ways with the movement of animals and the saving of animals that others generally won't do to the degree that we'll do.
But how long are you going to do this for? Because it must take a hell of a lot out of you.
My long-term objective is to make sure the world's a far safer place when I leave it than what it was when I came into it for animals. And that's my aim. So I'll be in this doing what I do for life.
The animals suffering in Ukraine, as time goes on, it hasn't got easier or better, has it? Just because it might have got knocked off the headlines here in the UK.
The war's still there. The fighting's still there. The fighting's still the same. Animals are still getting cut off. Animals are still getting killed. Animals are still getting injured. Shelters have still got no food. They've got no supplies. They've got nothing. And in many cases, it's worse. What I'm now seeing is Ukrainians are massively taking up the responsibility inside of Ukraine to obviously to assist and to help their animals where possible. They're doing a phenomenal job. We work with quite a few of them. They're doing absolutely magnificent. But Ukraine needs support. It needs massive amounts of support, and it needs continued support. Can't just be a thing of, oh, it's not popular anymore because it's not on the news. Let's go on to the next thing.
And in terms of the awesome work that you have done so far, what are you proudest of?
People always hit up and say stuff like, obviously, like, awesome work, and you hear like the names hero branded around and stuff like that. And to be honest with you, it really gripes me, and it does, because I don't want to be seen as that. The thing I'm most proudest of will be the level of compassion, love, affection, and care that our volunteers give to the dogs and the cats and the goats, the foxes, the sheep, like with everything, donkeys, ponies, horses, on a daily basis. And yeah, so that's what I've been most proud of.
And how wonderful is it when you see those animals now and see them safe?
No, it's incredible. Hopefully one day I'll get to sit down and have a proper look at obviously where all the animals are now, and obviously we know where they are and what they're doing and stuff. But what I mean is actually get to sit down and look and physically enjoy that, because at the moment I need to sit down and look at animals I can help, not animals that we have helped.